They thought it was just another elderly woman, another quiet afternoon, another incident that would disappear into paperwork. What they didn't expect was the phone call, or who answered it. Within hours, body cam footage was locked down, federal offices were alerted, and one officer realized his badge wouldn't protect him anymore. This story isn't about violence. It's about the moment power changes hands. Kindly hit the subscribe button, like, comment, and tell me where you are watching from to get more videos. Aria Elizabeth was halfway down the front steps when the voice cut through the afternoon. "Ma'am, stop right there." She paused, not startled so much as surprised. It was the kind of day that didn't expect interruption. The air was warm but mild, the neighborhood quiet in the way it usually was when people were either at work or keeping to themselves. Aria had stepped outside, only to check the small mailbox at the edge of her lawn, and to take a breath of fresh air before going back inside. Nothing more. She turned slowly, careful with her balance, and saw the patrol car pulled partly to the curb, partly onto the grass. The engine was still running. The officer stood beside it, already watching her, already tense. Aria raised one hand slightly, more a habit than a signal. "Yes, sir." Her voice was calm. It always was. Decades of teaching herself to stay measured had turned calm into instinct. She wasn't afraid. Not yet. She had done nothing wrong, and she knew it. "I need you to come over here," the officer said. She looked down at the steps, then back at him. "May I ask why?" The question wasn't defiant. It was quiet, almost polite. Aria believed in asking before assuming. She had lived long enough to know that confusion often came from missed explanations. The officer didn't answer the question. He repeated the instruction, sharper this time. "Come here. Now." Aria nodded once. She moved carefully, one step at a time, her hand brushing the rail as she descended. Her knees ached in the way they often did when she moved too quickly, so she didn't rush. She never rushed anymore. As she crossed the lawn, she noticed small things the way she always did. The grass needing another trim, the faint smell of laundry soap drifting from a nearby house, the sound of a television somewhere down the block. Ordinary details, familiar ones. They grounded her. She stopped a few feet from the officer, leaving space between them. "I'm Aria Elizabeth," she said, offering her name without being asked. "I live right there." The officer's jaw tightened. He was younger than her son, maybe in his early 30s, his posture rigid, his hands already hovering near his belt. His name badge read Scott Richardson. "What were you doing out here?" he asked. "Checking my mail," she said, "and getting some air." Richardson looked past her, toward the house, then back at her face. His eyes moved quickly, not settling, as if he were scanning for something she couldn't see. "You live alone?" he asked. "Yes," Aria said. "My husband passed some years ago." She didn't add anything else. She never volunteered more than was necessary. Life had taught her that details could be twisted if offered too freely. Richardson exhaled sharply, like he was already frustrated. "We got a call." "A call about what?" Aria asked. He ignored the question again. "You were reported acting suspicious." Aria blinked. Suspicious how? Richardson stepped closer. The space she had left between them disappeared. She could see the tension in his face now, the way his brow pulled down, the way his mouth stayed tight. "Don't play games with me," he said. "I'm not," Aria replied, still calm, though something inside her had begun to shift. Not fear. Awareness. The sense that the conversation wasn't moving in a reasonable direction. "I've lived here for 18 years, she continued. "I do the same things every day. I don't bother anyone." Richardson's eyes flicked again toward the house. "You got ID on you?" "No," Aria said. "It's inside." "Go get it." She hesitated, not because she didn't want to comply, but because she understood how situations could change when someone turned their back. "Would you like to come with me?" she asked. "I don't move very fast." That was when his tone changed. "I didn't ask for suggestions," Richardson said. "I told you to go get it." Aria felt the first real flicker of unease then. She straightened her shoulders slightly, the way she had learned to do when she needed to steady herself. Officer, she said, I'm not trying to be difficult. I just want to understand what's happening. Richardson laughed, once short and humorless. What's happening is you're being uncooperative. That word landed heavier than it should have. Uncooperative. Arya had heard it before, years ago, in other contexts, always used to explain away behavior that didn't fit someone else's expectations. I'm standing right here, she said. I'm answering your questions. Richardson took another step forward. Turn around. Her heart beat once, hard. Why? Turn around, he repeated. Arya didn't move. Not because she was refusing, but because her body needed a moment to process what he was asking. The lawn felt suddenly uneven beneath her shoes. The quiet afternoon no longer felt quiet. Sir, she said carefully, I haven't done anything wrong. Richardson's voice rose. Turn around now. A curtain shifted across the street. Someone was watching. Arya noticed without turning her head. She felt exposed, standing there in her yard, the situation unfolding in full view of neighbors who knew her, who waved at her, who borrowed sugar from her when they ran out. I don't understand, she said. That's the problem, Richardson snapped. You don't need to understand. You need to comply. She took a slow breath. This was the moment she had spent a lifetime trying to avoid, the moment where calm stopped being enough. I'm 78 years old, she said. If you're worried about something, we can talk about it. Richardson reached for her arm. The contact was sudden. His grip was firm, unnecessary. Arya gasped more from surprise than pain. Don't touch me, she said. Stop resisting, he said, already pulling her arm back. I'm not resisting, Arya said, her voice rising despite herself. You're hurting me. Her balance faltered. The ground tilted. She tried to steady herself, but Richardson didn't loosen his grip. Instead, he pushed. Arya fell. The impact knocked the air from her lungs. The grass scraped her palms. Pain shot through her hip, sharp and immediate. She lay there for a second, stunned. The world reduced to breath and ache. Get up, Richardson ordered. She couldn't. Not right away. Her body didn't respond the way it used to. I need a moment, she said, struggling to inhale. Richardson didn't wait. He grabbed her arm again, hauled her upward with no care for how her weight shifted or where her feet landed. Her knee buckled. She cried out. Stop, she said. Please. Stop making a scene, he snapped. A door opened somewhere. A voice called out, Is everything okay? Richardson shot a look toward the sound. Go back inside, he yelled. Arya felt humiliation settle in heavier than the pain. She had lived her life quietly. She paid her bills. She helped her neighbors. She stayed out of trouble. And here she was on the ground, being treated like a problem that needed to be handled quickly and forcefully. Richardson forced her hands behind her back. The motion sent another jolt of pain through her shoulders. I can't hold them like that, she said, her voice shaking now. My joints. Stop talking, he said. The cuffs clicked closed. Arya closed her eyes, just for a second. She focused on breathing, on staying conscious, on not letting panic take over. She thought of her late husband's voice telling her to stay steady. She thought of her son, far away, always worrying too much, always telling her to call if she needed anything. She hadn't wanted to bother him. She never did. Richardson stepped back, looking down at her as she struggled to sit upright. You could have made this easy, he said. Arya looked up at him, her eyes clear despite the pain. I was just checking my mail, she said. He didn't respond. She shifted her weight, carefully, managing to sit on the grass. Her hands were numb now, her wrists aching against the cuffs. Her heart was still racing, but her mind had gone quiet in a way she recognized. The quiet that came when something important had just changed. Richardson turned away, speaking into his radio, his voice already casual, already shaping the story. Arya listened, and in that moment, she understood something with absolute clarity. No one was going to fix this for her unless she acted. When Richardson finally turned back, Arya spoke again, her voice low but steady. Officer, she said. What? He snapped. I need my phone, she said. He hesitated, just long enough for her to see doubt flicker across his face. It's in my pocket, she added. I need to call my son. Richardson scoffed. That's not happening. Arya didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply held his gaze. He's military, she said. I think he should know where I am. Something shifted then. Not enough to stop what had already happened, but enough to matter later. Richardson looked away first. The quiet afternoon was gone, but the story wasn't over. The patrol car rolled in slowly, tires crunching against the edge of the curb before cutting onto the grass without hesitation. It didn't signal. It didn't pause to observe. It simply arrived, claiming space that didn't belong to it. Scott Richardson stepped out before the engine even went quiet. He didn't look around to take in the street or the houses or the woman standing near her steps. His eyes locked onto Arya immediately, as if the moment had already been decided somewhere else. His shoulders were squared, his movements sharp and practiced, the kind of posture meant to establish control before a word was spoken. Hey, he called out. Not a greeting, a command. Arya turned toward him fully now, her hands visible at her sides. She didn't rush. She didn't freeze. She stood the way she always did when approached by authority, still, open, careful not to appear threatening, even when there was no reason she should have to think that way. Yes, she said. Richardson closed the distance between them with long strides, stopping closer than necessary. Too close. He smelled faintly of sweat and something metallic, the kind of smell that lingered around gear and belts worn too tightly for too long. What are you doing out here? He asked. The question wasn't curious. It was accusatory, as if her presence itself needed justification. I live here, Arya said, gesturing gently toward the house behind her. I was just outside for a moment. Richardson's eyes flicked to the porch, the windows, the door. He looked like someone searching for confirmation of a suspicion he couldn't yet name. You were reported, he said. Reported for what? Arya asked. He ignored her again. You got anything on you I should know about? The phrasing was deliberate. It framed her as a potential problem before she had done anything at all. No, she said. I don't. Richardson let out a short breath through his nose, almost a scoff. Step off the steps. She was already off them, but she moved another half step forward anyway, trying to show cooperation without surrendering her dignity. I'm happy to answer questions, she said, but I'd like to understand why you're here. Richardson's jaw tightened. I'm here because someone called you in. Arya's brow furrowed slightly. Called me in for standing in my own yard? He leaned in, his voice dropping. Don't get smart with me. I'm not, she said. I'm confused. Confusion didn't slow him down. It never did. Richardson straightened, his hand brushing the front of his vest as if to remind both of them who held the authority in this moment. Where's your ID? He asked. It's inside, Arya said. Go get it. She glanced toward the house, then back at him. If you don't mind, I'd prefer to stay where you can see me. That was enough to trigger something in him. Richardson's posture stiffened, his tone hardening. You don't get to set conditions. I'm not trying to, Arya said evenly. I just want to make sure we're both comfortable. His lips pressed into a thin line. What makes you think I'm uncomfortable? She didn't answer that. She didn't need to. The tension was already obvious, thick enough to feel in the air between them. Turn around, he said suddenly. The command landed without warning, abrupt and heavy. Why? Arya asked. Because I told you to, Richardson snapped. Her heart beat faster now, a quiet warning she had learned not to ignore. Am I being detained? She asked. Richardson stared at her, eyes cold. You're about to be, if you keep talking. That was when Arya realized this wasn't about a call. It wasn't about suspicion. It was about control, and Richardson had already decided she wasn't giving him enough of it. I'm standing here, she said. I'm not going anywhere. He stepped closer again, invading her space deliberately. Turn. Around. The street was no longer empty. She could feel it. The sense of being watched had crept in, subtle but unmistakable. Curtains shifted. A car slowed as it passed. Arya held her ground, not out of defiance, but because her body needed clarity before movement. Officer, she said, I'm asking you to explain what you think I've done. Richardson laughed once, sharp and dismissive. "You're done explaining." He reached for her arm. The movement was quick, practiced. His hand closed around her wrist with no warning, no attempt at restraint. Pain flared, instantly bright and shocking. "Please don't do that," Arya said, her voice tight. "You're hurting me." "Stop resisting," Richardson said automatically, the phrase rolling off his tongue as if it had been waiting there all along. "I'm not resisting," she said. "I'm standing still." He pulled harder. Her balance shifted, her foot slipping slightly on the grass. She tried to steady herself, but the motion only gave him more leverage. "I'm asking you to stop," she said. Richardson shoved her. The world tipped sideways. The ground rushed up. Arya hit the grass hard, the impact jarring her body in a way that stole her breath. For a moment, she couldn't speak. She could only gasp, her chest tight, pain radiating through her hip and shoulder. "Get up," Richardson barked. She tried. Her body didn't respond the way it used to. Pain locked her in place. "I need a moment," she said, her voice thin. Richardson didn't wait. He grabbed her again, hauling her upward with no care for her balance. Her knee buckled, and she cried out as pain shot through her leg. "Stop screaming," he said. "You're making this worse." The words barely registered. Arya's world had narrowed to sensation and shock. Hands on her arms. Pressure. The smell of grass crushed beneath her palms. A voice called out from across the street, uncertain but concerned. "Hey, what's going on?" "Mind your business." Richardson shouted without turning. He forced her hands behind her back, twisting her arms in a way that made her gasp. Her shoulders burned, her joints protesting sharply. "I can't hold him like that," she said. "Please." "Then you should have complied," he replied. The cuffs snapped shut around her wrists, cold and unforgiving. Arya's breathing came in short bursts now. She focused on staying upright, on not letting panic take over. She had been in pain before. She had survived worse than this. But never like this. Never at the hands of someone who was supposed to protect her. Richardson stepped back, surveying her as if assessing a task completed. "You brought this on yourself," he said. She looked up at him, disbelief and hurt mingling in her expression. "I asked you what was happening," she said. "That's all." He didn't respond. He turned away, speaking into his radio, his tone already shifting, calmer, controlled, rehearsed. Arya listened as he spoke, noting how the story changed even as it was being told. Words like non-compliant and resisted floated back to her, each one erasing a piece of what had actually happened. The realization settled in slowly but firmly. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision. Richardson finished his call and turned back toward her. "Sit tight," he said. She was already sitting, the grass damp beneath her, her wrists aching in the cuffs. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. "Officer," she said quietly. He looked down at her, irritated. "What?" "I need my phone," she said. "I need to let my son know where I am." Richardson hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. Enough for her to see that the request had landed somewhere he hadn't expected. "That's not happening," he said. "It's in my pocket," Arya replied. "I'm not asking to leave. I just need to make a call." "No," he said again, firmer this time. Arya studied his face, then spoke with care. "He's military," she said. "He worries when he can't reach me." Richardson's eyes flicked away, just briefly, toward the patrol car. When he looked back, his expression had changed, not softened, but tightened. "We'll see," he said. He turned away again, and as he did, Arya understood something important. The arrival hadn't been about resolving a call. It had been about asserting power. And power, once questioned, rarely retreated quietly. Richardson didn't give her time to recover before the next command came. "Stand up." Arya looked at him, then down at her hands cuffed behind her back. Her wrists were already swelling, the metal biting into skin that bruised easily these days. "I can't get up on my own like this," she said. "My balance isn't good." Richardson sighed loudly, the sound heavy with impatience. "I'm not asking for excuses." "I'm explaining," Arya replied. Her voice was steady, but it took effort now. Pain had a way of making even simple words feel distant. "If you help me slowly, I can stand." He stepped closer again, looming over her. You don't get to tell me how this goes. I'm not telling you, she said. I'm asking you not to hurt me. That seemed to irritate him more than anything else she had said so far. Hurt you, he repeated, incredulous. You did that to yourself. Arya shook her head slightly. I didn't touch you. I didn't threaten you. I didn't run. Stop arguing, Richardson snapped. You were warned. She took a breath, shallow but controlled. About what? He ignored the question and grabbed her arm again, this time yanking her upward without warning. A sharp cry escaped her before she could stop it. Her knee folded under her, and for a second she thought she might fall again. Slow down, she pleaded. Please. Stop yelling, he said. People are watching. She couldn't help that. Her body reacted faster than her pride. Pain doesn't wait for permission. A neighbor stood near the edge of a driveway, now, phone in hand, pretending to scroll while clearly recording. Another voice drifted from farther down the street, tense and uncertain. Sir, someone called out she's an old woman. Richardson's head snapped up. Back away, he shouted. This doesn't concern you. Arya felt the heat rise in her chest, not anger, but something deeper. Shame mixed with disbelief. She had lived on this street long enough to recognize those voices. People who knew her, people who had seen her carry groceries, wave good morning, sit on her porch in the evenings. I don't understand why this is happening, she said, forcing the words out slowly. If someone called, you can tell me what they said. We can clear it up. Richardson laughed, sharp and dismissive. You think you're in a discussion? I think there's been a mistake, Arya replied, and mistakes can be fixed. His eyes hardened. You don't get to decide that. He repositioned her roughly, turning her body so she faced the patrol car. Her shoulder protested loudly, a deep ache spreading down her arm. That hurts, she said. My shoulder. Stop talking, he cut in. Every time you talk, you make it worse for yourself. Arya closed her mouth, not because she agreed, but because she felt the futility pressing in. Still, she tried once more, softer now. I've lived here nearly 2 decades, she said. You can ask anyone on this block who I am. That's not how this works, Richardson said. You don't get special treatment because you've been here a long time. I'm not asking for special treatment, she replied. I'm asking for basic respect. The word respect hung between them, heavy and unwelcome. Richardson's jaw clenched. You should have thought about that before you started resisting. I never resisted you, Arya said. You grabbed me. He turned toward her sharply. You're calling me a liar? I'm telling you what happened, she said, meeting his eyes despite the fear beginning to settle in her stomach. I don't want this to get worse. That was when his tone changed completely. You're not in a position to make requests, he said, his voice low and edged with something dangerous. Right now, you do exactly what I say, or I will make sure you regret it. The threat wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. It was calm, deliberate, and unmistakable. Arya felt her throat tighten. She swallowed hard. Sir, she said, I'm 78 years old. I'm not a threat to you. You don't get to decide that either, Richardson replied. He tightened his grip again, forcing her closer to the car. The metal edge pressed into her hip. She winced. Please, she said, if you slow down, I can cooperate. That's funny, he said, because from where I'm standing, you've done nothing but fight me. Her eyes filled, not with tears yet, but with the pressure that came before them. Asking questions isn't fighting, she said. It is when I tell you to stop, he shot back. Richardson raised his voice now, projecting it outward toward the street. Ma'am, you are under arrest for resisting a lawful order. The words hit her harder than the cuffs had. For what? She asked, stunned. What order? Turn around, he barked again, even though she was already facing away from him. Stop moving. I'm not moving, she said. You're pushing me. Stop resisting, he shouted. The phrase echoed, loud enough for the neighbors to hear, loud enough to rewrite the scene in real time. Arya realized then how quickly truth could be buried under volume. Her breathing grew uneven. Panic began to edge in uninvited. She focused on her son's face, the way he always told her to stay calm, to breathe, to speak clearly. "I'm scared," she said quietly. "I don't know what you want from me." Richardson didn't respond. He pressed her forward, pinning her briefly against the side of the car as he adjusted his grip. The pressure was firm, unnecessary. "Keep it together," he muttered. "You're doing this to yourself." Across the street, the neighbor with the phone took a step closer. "You don't need to manhandle her," the voice said, louder now. Richardson spun halfway toward the sound. "Step back, or you'll be next." The threat worked. The neighbor stopped moving. Arya felt tears slip free then, silent and unwanted. She hated that more than anything else. Hated that this moment would be remembered as weakness instead of endurance. "I want a supervisor," she said suddenly, the words coming from somewhere deeper, steadier. Richardson froze for a beat. "What did you say?" he asked. "I want a supervisor," Arya repeated. "I have the right to ask for one." The pause that followed was brief, but it mattered. His eyes flicked toward the patrol car, then back to her face. "You don't have any rights right now," he said. "That's not true," Arya replied, her voice shaking but firm. "And you know it." His expression darkened. "You're done talking." He guided her down again, forcing her into a seated position against the car, the metal cold against her back. Her legs trembled, exhausted. As he stepped away to speak into his radio again, Arya lowered her head and breathed through the pain, through the fear, through the disbelief. Her words had turned sharp not because she wanted conflict, but because calm alone hadn't been enough. And somewhere deep inside, she understood that the worst part wasn't the pain. It was realizing how easily her voice had been dismissed. Richardson's patience finally snapped when the radio crackled back at him. He turned abruptly, his face set hard, and reached for Arya again without warning. This time there was no pretense of control, no attempt to mask the anger behind procedure. "Get up," he said. "I can't," Arya replied, breathless. "My legs." He didn't let her finish. He yanked her upward by the cuffs, twisting her arms higher than they could go. Pain exploded through her shoulders, sharp and immediate, forcing a cry out of her before she could stop it. "Stop screaming," Richardson said. "You're resisting." "I'm not resisting," Arya gasped. "You're hurting me." Her feet barely found the ground before he shoved her forward. She stumbled, her balance gone, and collided with the side of the patrol car. The impact knocked the air from her chest. Her cheek scraped against the metal, and she tasted blood. Across the street, someone shouted, "Hey, that's enough." Richardson ignored them. Hands still, he barked, even though her hands were already locked behind her back. Arya tried to steady herself, but her knees shook violently now. Her body had crossed a threshold it couldn't recover from quickly. The pain in her hip throbbed with every breath, and her shoulders felt like they were tearing apart. "I need to sit," she said weakly. "Please." Richardson pushed her again, harder this time, forcing her down. She dropped to her knees on the grass, the impact jarring her spine. She cried out, the sound raw and unfiltered. "Stop it," a neighbor yelled. "She's not doing anything." Richardson spun toward the voice, rage flashing across his face. "Get back inside your house right now." The authority in his voice carried weight. The neighbor hesitated, then stepped back, fear overtaking concern. Arya stayed where she was, kneeling, her head lowered, not in submission, but exhaustion. Her breathing came in shallow bursts. Her vision blurred at the edges. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered. "I didn't do anything." Richardson crouched slightly, so he was closer to her face. His voice dropped tight and controlled. "You don't get to decide what makes sense." He grabbed her shoulder and forced her upright again. The motion was too fast, too rough. Her body resisted instinctively, not in defiance, but survival. The shift was small, involuntary. "See," he said loudly. "There it is. Resisting." "I can't control it," Arya said, tears streaming freely now. "You're hurting me." That was the moment control slipped from his hands entirely. Richardson shoved her backward, pinning her against the patrol car with his full weight. His forearm pressed into her upper back, crushing her chest against the metal. She struggled to breathe. "I can't breathe," she said, panic breaking through her composure. "Please." "Stop fighting," he said. "I'm not fighting," she gasped. "I'm scared." The word didn't slow him. If anything, it seemed to harden him further. "Quit lying," he snapped. Aria's legs gave out completely then. She sagged against the car, barely held upright by his grip. Her body trembled uncontrollably. A phone camera was clearly visible now, held up by a neighbor who had stopped pretending not to record. Another voice shouted, "You're going to hurt her." Richardson glanced briefly toward the phone, then back at Aria. For a split second, something flickered across his face, not concern, but calculation. He released the pressure, just long enough to reposition her, then forced her down onto the grass again, face turned sideways, her cheek pressed into the dirt. "Stay down," he ordered. The ground was cool and damp. Aria focused on the sensation, because it was something she could understand, something real. Her wrists burned. Her shoulders felt like fire. Every breath hurt. She tried to speak, but her throat wouldn't cooperate. The words came out as a hoarse whisper. "I need help." Richardson stood over her, breathing hard now. "You brought this on yourself," he said again, louder, as if saying it enough times might make it true. Aria's mind drifted in and out of focus. She thought of her kitchen clock, always ticking too loudly in the mornings. She thought of her son's voice on the phone, steady and reassuring, telling her to call if anything ever felt wrong. This felt wrong. Richardson reached down and rolled her onto her side roughly, then onto her back, adjusting the cuffs again. The metal bit deeper into her wrists. She cried out. "Stop," she pleaded. "Please stop." "Stay still," he commanded. She tried. She truly did. But pain has a way of forcing movement, no matter how hard someone tries to obey. Her breathing turned ragged. Dizziness washed over her. "Officer," she said faintly, "I don't feel well." He didn't respond. Instead, he stepped back and spoke into his radio again, his voice calm now, controlled, already shaping the version of events that would travel ahead of him. "Suspect is detained," he said. "Resisted verbal commands. Required force to gain compliance." Aria lay there listening, every word landing like another blow. She understood then that this wasn't just happening to her body. It was happening to the truth. As Richardson finished speaking, he looked down at her once more. For the first time since he arrived, uncertainty crossed his face. Not remorse, not regret, just the realization that something had gone too far. But the moment passed quickly. He turned away, leaving Aria on the ground, cuffed, injured, and struggling to breathe. The abuse of power had already done its damage, and there was no taking it back. Richardson finally stepped back, letting go of her arms as if releasing a tool that had broken. Aria sagged to the grass, the cuffs still tight around her wrists, biting into her skin. Her breaths came unevenly, shallow, and sharp, each one reminding her that the pain in her shoulders and knees wasn't fading. He didn't kneel to check on her. He didn't apologize or even glance at the bruises forming across her wrists and forearms. He just straightened, adjusted his belt, and took a step away, returning his attention to the radio in his hand. His body relaxed as though the work of domination had ended the moment he chose. Aria stayed low, gripping the cuffs, trying to make sense of the sudden stillness around her. The quiet of the street pressed in, sharp and almost accusing. A few neighbors had edged closer to the sidewalk, but stopped themselves, uncertain how much they could do without becoming part of the problem. Their phones still hovered in hesitant hands, recording the aftermath. Her body ached everywhere, and her mind spun with fragments of disbelief. How quickly routine had turned into violence. How easily authority had dismissed the truth of her words, her compliance, her humanity. She had done nothing wrong. And yet she lay there exposed and shaken, while he walked away like none of it had mattered. Tears threatened, not just from the pain, but from the humiliation of it all. She wiped her eyes and tried to steady herself, forcing her thoughts back to clarity. Each movement brought a jolt of agony, but she focused on her breathing. Slow, controlled, survival first. Her gaze wandered to the patrol car, to Richardson's broad back as he spoke into the radio again, calm and professional now, reshaping the story to fit a narrative that suited him. And then it hit her, this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The moment had shifted, but the fight hadn't yet begun. She remained on the grass, wrists stinging, legs trembling, heart racing, but alive, alert, and aware. Alone in appearance, yes, but far from powerless. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a single thought rose above the pain. She had someone who could change everything. She took a slow, careful breath and reached into her pocket. The phone was there, cold, solid, ready. Her fingers closed around it. One call, one voice, one truth, waiting to be spoken. Richardson may have walked away, leaving her behind in body and in authority, but he had underestimated the force that could arrive from the other end of a single phone line. And Arya Elizabeth was not finished yet. Arya's hands trembled as she held the phone, but the tremor wasn't fear. It was the sting of pain, the memory of pressure on her shoulders and the scrape on her cheek. She pressed the screen and unlocked it carefully, her fingers stiff from the cuffs and the cold metal biting into her skin. The contact list scrolled briefly, her thumb finding the name she'd memorized long ago, Elias Monroe Elizabeth. She tapped it, watched the call connect, and waited. The line clicked, and then a familiar voice answered, calm, measured, trained. "Mother? I'm outside," Arya said, her voice low, clipped. No quivering, no pleading. Just facts. "Scott Richardson, officer, arrested me, outside my house, cuffed, injured." There was a pause, a breath, but not the hesitation of surprise. Elias Monroe Elizabeth had learned to absorb urgency without panicking. "Do you need medical attention?" he asked. "Not yet. He's still here. But I can't move freely. My shoulder and hip hurt. Hands cuffed. Grass. Front yard." Each detail precise, each one clear. Nothing left to ambiguity. "I'm on my way," Elias said. "Do not engage him further. Stay where you are. I need you to remain calm." Arya's lips pressed together. Calm. She could do calm. She had been calm for decades. She hadn't needed anyone to teach her that. She hadn't needed anyone to tell her to hold still while her words were ignored, her body abused. But she let his voice guide her now. "He thinks compliance equals weakness," she said, almost mechanically. "He doesn't see me." "He will see you," Elias said, "and when I arrive, that changes everything. Do not respond to any more aggression. Do not escalate. Do you understand?" "Yes," she replied, crisp and steady. Each syllable counted. "He's waiting for compliance, not explanation. I'm staying put." "Good," Elias said. "I'll be there. I'll handle the rest. One call, one action. Keep yourself safe until then." "I will," she said. The words weren't reassurance for him. They were affirmation to herself. She wasn't powerless. Not really. Not anymore. She ended the call, slid the phone back into her pocket, and breathed. The air felt heavier now, but not suffocating. Not once she had spoken of facts. Not once she had invoked his presence. Richardson remained nearby, unaware that the balance of the encounter had quietly shifted. He thought he had control. He thought the story had been written. He hadn't seen the call. He hadn't anticipated the ripple it would send, the authority it would summon. Arya flexed her fingers, feeling the stiff ache of her wrists against the cuffs. The sun was lower now, but her resolve had sharpened. She stayed seated, quiet, counting breaths, steadying her heart, waiting. Not afraid, not panicked, just aware, prepared, and resolute. One call had been enough. One voice had already begun to rewrite the rules of the moment. And Arya Elizabeth, despite bruised skin and trembling limbs, sat in control of what came next. By the time Elias arrived, the street had shifted in tone. Neighbors whispered from behind curtains, some holding phones hesitantly, recording. Richardson, still standing tall in his uniform, glanced around with irritation, unaware that the tide had quietly begun to turn. Elias Monroe Elizabeth stepped from the unmarked car, calm, deliberate. His presence wasn't loud or threatening. It didn't need to be. He moved like someone used to authority and trained in command, the kind of presence that doesn't demand attention, it commands it. "Step back," he said to Richardson, voice firm but measured. No shouting, no flare of anger. Just absolute certainty. Richardson froze for the briefest moment, scanning the figure before him, the precision in the posture, the weight of the name he hadn't yet heard. Who? Richardson started, but Elias didn't wait. My mother is 78 years old. Elias said, eyes locked on him. You assaulted her. You restrained her, without cause. You used excessive force. His words were clipped, professional, each one delivering fact, accusation, and consequence in the same breath. Richardson's lips pressed together, his fingers twitching near his belt, but the usual bluster and intimidation fell flat. Something in Elias's tone, the way he carried authority effortlessly, broke through the usual hierarchy. Delta Force, a neighbor whispered, recognizing the name from prior news, from training records, from a career that demanded respect. Phones lifted, held higher now, the realization dawning. This wasn't just a civilian calling for help. Elias continued, stepping closer, but never aggressively. Body cam footage, radio logs, witness accounts, they all tell a story you can't rewrite. And I intend for that story to be seen exactly as it happened. Richardson swallowed, a flicker of panic crossing his face. You can't. You're under investigation, Elias said, cutting him off. And it starts now. From across the street, several phones buzzed simultaneously. Social media notifications pinged. Messages were already being sent, photos and video, circulating quietly, reaching beyond the neighborhood in moments. The tide of accountability was moving faster than Richardson could comprehend. His posture stiffened. The aura of untouchable authority he had carried so confidently for years was slipping. Each second stretched, and the weight of Elias's presence made the air feel heavier around him. Elias reached Arya, placing a hand briefly on her shoulder. You're safe now, he said quietly. She nodded, still seated, still bruised, still trembling, but steadier than she had been before. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The presence of her son, the unspoken authority of his Delta Force background, had already changed the landscape entirely. Richardson's radio crackled again, this time not in his favor. A commanding voice called down from headquarters, asking for immediate clarification on a use-of-force incident, citing a civilian complaint that had just escalated into a potential federal review. Phones were ringing in precincts, offices, and federal channels. The name Elias Monroe Elizabeth carried weight, authority, and consequences. Richardson realized, finally and fully, that the story wasn't his to control. Every assumption he had relied upon, compliance, fear, the invisibility of his victim, was shattered, and it had started with one quiet woman, one calm call, and one name that changed everything. The shift was total. Richardson, once untouchable in his uniform, now stood exposed, watched, and accountable. The balance of power had tilted, and nothing would ever look the same. Arya Elizabeth, still seated in the grass, looked at her son with quiet gratitude. She didn't need to say anything. The streets, the witnesses, even the officer before her, all had seen what she had always known. Power isn't always the size of a fist or the sound of a command. Sometimes it's the measure of truth delivered at exactly the right moment. By mid-afternoon, the precinct had transformed from a routine office into a controlled chaos of calls, messages, and urgent meetings. Captain Lenora Hightower's heels clicked sharply against the tile floor as she entered the small evidence room, where screens flickered with video from multiple sources, body cams, neighbors' phones, and dash cams. She didn't need the narrative explained to her. The footage spoke clearly enough, Richardson's hands gripping Arya Elizabeth, the push, the shove, the twisting of her arms. Every command shouted, every sharp motion, every moment of her confusion and pain was there, unvarnished and undeniable. Caleb Osei, the federal liaison, stood beside her, leaning forward with his arms crossed. His eyes didn't leave the screen. This is textbook abuse of authority, he said quietly, almost himself. The department's internal policies? Violated at every step. Hightower nodded, her expression tight, professional, and unreadable. The officers believed compliance equals weakness, she said, and that belief cost them, and this woman, everything. He's lost control of the situation entirely. They watched as Arya sat bruised and trembling, then reached for her phone. Caleb's gaze flicked up at Hightower. That one call, he said, that's what triggered federal attention. Without it, this could have been buried as another minor incident. Hightower exhaled. It won't be buried. Not on my watch. We'll document everything, preserve every frame, and make sure headquarters sees the full story. Richardson's version isn't going to stand. The footage shifted to the moment Elias arrived. His presence was calm, commanding, undeniable. Even without confrontation, Richardson's posture faltered. Caleb nodded. Delta Force background, he said, that kind of authority is not something you ignore. It forces accountability. Hightower tapped the screen, pausing on Richardson's expression as he realized he had lost the narrative. That's the moment it all changes, she said. The one where they realize they're being watched and there's no rewriting history. Should we notify internal affairs now? Caleb asked. Yes, she said. Immediately. And this goes up the chain to federal oversight. No shortcuts. Every step has to be precise. The two worked methodically, noting timestamps, recording witness statements, and preparing a report that would leave no ambiguity. Hightower's mind ran through every consequence Richardson would face: suspension, investigation, potential criminal charges. Everything had to be airtight. Outside, the world was already reacting. Phones buzzed, videos circulated. Social media lit up quietly with snippets of the encounter. The local precinct tried to control the narrative, but it was too late. The truth had already spread. Hightower leaned back slightly, crossing her arms. Abuse of power rarely goes unpunished when the evidence is this clear. He's going to learn that the hard way. Caleb gave a tight nod, and Arya Elizabeth will see justice. Not just for herself, but for anyone else who's ever been dismissed because of age, race, or vulnerability. They watched the footage one more time, slow and deliberate, as Arya's quiet resilience and Elias's precise, commanding arrival defined the arc of accountability. The reckoning wasn't immediate, but it was inevitable. Every push, every shove, every violation would be documented, and when Richardson faced it, there would be no escape from the consequences of his actions. By the time they stepped out of the evidence room, the framework for Richardson's accountability was complete. The story was no longer just an incident on a street. It had become a formal, inescapable examination of power misused, and the moment when authority finally met its consequences. Scott Richardson didn't get to return to the routine he had expected. Within hours, the precinct received a direct order from Internal Affairs, suspended immediately pending full investigation. His radio calls were redirected, his schedule frozen, and every official channel he might have used to control the narrative was closed to him. News of the incident had already spread beyond the block. Local media outlets picked up the video, neighbors' recordings, and statements from witnesses who had seen the abuse firsthand. Each clip, each replay reinforced the truth. Richardson's version of events didn't match reality. Social media amplified it further. The public reaction was swift, measured, and overwhelmingly critical. Federal investigators, alerted by Elias Monroe Elizabeth's call and the documented sequence of events, moved quickly. Interviews were conducted, statements corroborated, and body cam footage logged as official evidence. Every detail of the abuse, from the shove to the twisting of Arya's arms, was verified. Charges followed. Richardson faced multiple counts of assault, misuse of authority, and civil rights violations. The suspension became indefinite. Even colleagues who had once trusted his judgment looked at him differently, wary of the legal and professional ramifications that now loomed over him like a shadow. For Arya Elizabeth, the aftermath was quieter, but no less significant. The public narrative shifted in her favor. Stories highlighted her courage, her composure, and the call that had turned a moment of violence into a catalyst for accountability. Interviews captured her dignity without exaggeration. Her age and frailty contrasted against the arrogance of a man who had assumed she could be dismissed. Neighbors who had watched from behind windows or recorded the encounter finally saw the full arc: Richardson's removal, the federal attention, the suspension, and charges. It validated everything they had witnessed. Aria's name became a symbol of endurance, of strength that doesn't need to shout to be heard. She returned home quietly after the official statements were made, her wrists sore but free, her body still aching. She didn't celebrate. She didn't boast. She simply stood on her lawn, looked out at the street, and breathed deeply. The weight of what had happened didn't vanish, but the imbalance had been corrected. Justice, measured and precise, had arrived, not in a moment of rage, but through truth, patience, and resolve. Aria Elizabeth's dignity was affirmed publicly, her life no longer just a scene of victimhood, but a testament to how courage, clarity, and a single phone call could shift power and expose wrongdoing. Scott Richardson's career and reputation lay in ruins, dismantled by evidence and accountability. Aria's strength, however, endured, a quiet reminder that respect, truth, and courage could outlast the misuse of authority. The street was peaceful again, but the lesson remained. Power is never absolute, and even the smallest voice can trigger the reckoning it deserves.